So today we'll be covering an introduction to India in a number of different ways, but also for those of you that have extensive experience of some aspects of India, we would encourage you to ask more detailed questions. We will also look at India's regulatory framework and what it means for the overseas donor. And we will be looking at strategic giving and interventions. There will be some case studies, and we hope a lot of time for your questions with answers. Thank you.
I just wanted to start by thanking the organizer. I left that out in my introduction, so it's
No
wonderful
matter.
to start. So we at CAF India here aim to build an ecosystem for giving and social change. This requires alliances between corporates, individuals, between philanthropic foundations, governments, and charities, or NGOs as we call them in India. India has had a strong and vibrant social sector since 1947, the year of the birth of the nation and independence. And that has played an important role in the country's social and economic development. The three waves, starting from the Gandhian NGOs to more professionals entering the development sector in the early 1980s, have now in this century given way to social enterprises, which have become the order of the day. Whatever we are and whoever we are, these small and local grassroots organizations work with the underserved and marginalized across cities, across peri-urban areas, across rural areas, and very remote parts of the country. It brings their voices into the development agenda and ensures that resources intended for them actually reach and are effectively applied. India has now become the fifth largest economy in the world. So, what is the need now? Not all this growth has been inclusive, as we know. The gap between the top first percentile and the bottom 50th percentile has continued to widen. The COVID 19 pandemic has been a fragility multiplier and has pushed more than 200 million Indians into poverty. I could go on, but the question is, what is the gap between the 2030 agenda and where we are currently? A recent report, March 2022, uh, focuses on building philanthropic infrastructure to accelerate giving in India. And it indicates that social sector funding in India, primarily driven by the government, has grown approximately 12% annually from about 10 lakh crore to about 17.5 lakh crore. 10 million is a crore, we got count here, and 100,000. So, and the gaps are huge. The Niti Aayog, the planning division of the government, the Niti Aayog in India says that India needs to funnel approximately 13% of its GDP into social causes. The current average, any guesses? Roughly 7%. If we are just to attain the minimum goal set by 2030. According to the Standard Chartered SDG Investment Map report, India needs an investment of 2.4 trillion US dollars to meet the goals. I won't talk much about the global goal, a global gap, but we obviously contribute to it. And let's look at the landscape in the Indian context as you look here. Corporate giving in India was driven by the 2% mandate of social responsibility and has grown 15% annually over 7 years. However, the contributions are still growing and not reaching because we expect about 32% of total private giving to be CSR by 2026. But these are pre-designed, and there are challenges for local NGOs to reach out and develop contextual programs. Also, CSR funds cluster into certain regions and themes, whereas rural hinterlands are less served by this mechanism. So we do have a map of where it goes and where it doesn't, and it's widely known by everybody. Another very big source of money that came from overseas and internally was retail giving. It recorded a 730% jump just in May 2021, and more generally during COVID, and has now shrunk post COVID, if there is such a thing. The infrastructure and architecture was, however, available for people to donate, and NGOs benefited immensely from the unrestricted funding, which enabled them to reach out and give to those in distress, to go where nobody else, no frontline worker went during the COVID lockdown and other times. This kind of giving, which is significantly reduced, also holds huge potential. We have a recent study by ourselves in India, which highlighted that 64% of the respondents across all age groups used cash as a regular mode of donation. And more than 50% had never used a crowdfunding platform. So there's a lot of scope for technology here. If the last example I want to give is from philanthropic foundations by the wealthy in India, notably the Azim Premji Foundation and the Tata Group. These are very well recognized for giving. Family philanthropy, in contrast, has contracted overall. So ultra high net worth individual giving has reduced. It had a peak in 2016, and high net worth individual giving within India has grown very modestly. If we look at the relative contributions as a percentage of wealth among Indian ultra high net worth individuals, it's from 0.1% to 0.15%, a teeny spread. In the United States, this is 1.2% to 2.5%. And in the UK, it is 0.5% to 1.8%. And it's grown in China from 0.5% to 1.4% to the best of our knowledge. So while this is expected to grow, and it's driven by increasing wealth and a rise in the number of tech entrepreneurs, now gen philanthropists, all projections for growth are for 2026. Read it as 2030. That's the way I look at it. Which means all this is going to happen after the SDGs are not met. All the organizations in the philanthropic landscape on the slide here operate within India and also operate overseas, outside of India. There is a need to generate both domestic and international contributions, foreign contributions. There is a need for those overseas to give to India, particularly as the global hotspots of endemic malnutrition, poverty, illiteracy, and other areas that the goals address are located within India.
So let me just ask you one question that people have asked in advance, Nivedita, before I ask you to continue this excellent summary. I mean, if you had to pick one of the 17 SDGs or two or three that you would really like to highlight that there is an acute need in regions of India, well, what would they be?
Well, I would look at SDG 5 and say, let's start with cross-cutting theme of gender equality. And let's take gender as a lens. And gender is not only about women. Let's look at the entire spectrum, the continuum. And let's talk about gender as a cross-cutting lens for all the goals. And this is also what the SDGs tell us to do. So I would say that would be the first. And the second is, of course, to take a planetary point of view to whatever we do. Make sure that it's sustainable. Having said this, from our point of view, I would think that we would look at livelihoods and jobs, livelihoods and jobs, food security, sustainable food systems, and look at early child development and education. These are the four areas that we would, from our point of view, emphasize as critical. And they would be strategic entry points to then looking at the life course. I would say this would help us to take a gendered view, a planetary view, and a life course view of the human being, where the goals fit in accordingly. So that will help us then to unlock the potential.
Oh, that's fantastic. And just so that everyone is aware, we are about to put a poll online which asks a version of the question in terms of what types of not-for-profit organizations you're the most interested in. So please do participate, and we'll share those results at the end of today's conversation. In the meantime, and I know you're going to speak about the SCRA in a minute, Nivedita, but would you just go over again, for those that aren't familiar with the way Indian currency is expressed, what exactly is a crore?
A crore is 10 million. So it's 7 zeros. And a lakh is 5 zeros. That's how we count it.
And in terms of the equivalent to the UK pound, you effectively divide by 10, right? So,
so that's how we.
Hopefully, that context is helpful for the people that are out there participating today.
Well, I just thought I would just bring to our notice the amendments of the Foreign Contributions Regulatory Act. The funds, there have been amendments which I will discuss later, but just to kind of put in perspective the situation, the funds raised by Indian NGOs fell by a brutal 87% in the first year of the amendment. This was the year 2019-20. And these were very important donations and grants that supported NGOs to work with local issues of hunger, childcare, malnutrition, unemployment, gender empowerment, water, sanitation, health. Members of the Indian diaspora, philanthropies, overseas employees, employee giving programs and corporations, and those with wealth could accelerate the achievement of the SDGs by giving and participating in the processes of change more broadly than only just, going beyond money. We look forward to a larger engagement in terms of how, what, why, where.
Mm-hmm. I believe it's time for the next slide. Please tell us about the regulatory framework, Nivedita, because I think a lot of people misunderstand that with the FCRA changes, it's almost impossible to give directly into India. And of course, that is just not the case. You can give directly to any not-for-profit within India, provided you work through the regulations. So please do explain them to us.
Thank you, Derek. I just want to start with what has been a major setback for the sector, the social sector, in the last 2 years, which is the FCRA amendment. We at CAF India are very conscious about operating within the framework of statutory compliances and have now reorganized ourselves to help donors and NGOs to be compliant, as also to be compliant ourselves. The FCRA was enacted in 1976 to regulate the utilization of foreign funds while enabling NGOs and other organizations to receive unrestricted foreign funding within a regulatory framework. Larger NGOs were able to receive and report on funds and sub-grant the money to smaller NGOs, thus enhancing reach and reaping economies of scale while amplifying impacts of the monies. A recent amendment in 2020 prohibits sub-granting of foreign funds within India. And this they also, number 2, reduced the annual cap on administrative costs from 50% to 20% and initiated a 5-year renewal of the license.
So if I can stop you there, Nivedita, those are huge changes. I mean, one of the misunderstandings many of us have is that the FCRA is a new thing. In fact, the FCRA has been in existence since 1976. But the recent changes mean that you cannot sub-grant, that the allowable administrative costs have reduced from 50% to 20%, and there are more frequent renewals of the licenses covered under its auspices. Is that a fair summary?
That's a very fair summary. And we had a lifelong license earlier. So that was withdrawn and it has to be now renewed, as do our charitable status under the Income Tax Act simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So it's a double problem. Mm-hmm. So donors froze giving to India because there was this misunderstanding. Until this was better understood and possibilities to give were encouraged via the rules. So while the amendment called for greater transparency, it, number 1, constricted the funnel of resources, as you can imagine. It, number 2, left many gray or unexplained areas to subjective understanding. For example, what is an administrative expense? It remains undefined, and legal and expert opinion is required to undertake day-to-day operations. Number 3,
I just was thinking, if you don't mind, that one of the things that CAF has always encouraged people to think about who donate is to not get too hung up on the whole overheads versus project delivery aspect of things. For those of you that are familiar with the World Giving Index, in its introduction, we consistently encourage donors to recognize that local infrastructure and capacity will need direct investment, and that investing in overheads and capacity building is entirely appropriate. And I think the really encouraging thing you're saying is not administrative expenses are not strictly defined as those types of grants.
No.
That's so encouraging.
There are possibilities to interpret within the law and the rules. Number three, a third problem was that the opening of a mandatory bank account was in one branch in New Delhi. So everybody in the whole of India needs an account in the single branch in New Delhi. And that's a huge deterrent. For example, 93% of NGOs with FCRA licenses are registered outside Delhi. It's just 7% of us here. So it's a huge problem for people. It took us at CAF India a while to reorganize ourselves and to convert these challenges into opportunities and strategies, which I think, will be discussing. But it's not been so easy for smaller NGOs working in far-flung areas, dependent on subgrants. And we have a bespoke program to work with them, with a bouquet of services and possibilities to collaborate and implement jointly. For donors now, we provide end-to-end bespoke implementation or execution from idea to impact, which means that one of the shifts we've made is to enter into a hybrid implementation model. Another example, I just wanted, because on the slide in the green, is the Income Tax Act, which has also required us to reorganize significantly and to help other NGOs be compliant while delivering on development commitments. We are now required to segregate fee-based or service contracts from donations. So we have, for example, in CAF India, set up a non-profit tax-paying company as a special purpose vehicle. So we've reorganized ourselves to be able to take both donations as well as service contracts. And this has helped us also to deal with the multiple new rules and amendments in the tax rules, and to help other NGOs to be aware of these, to be compliant. And this is a key offering to donors and organizations to work with us.
And one of the things that I think lots of people are very jealous of in Indian public policy is that the government mandates a 2% minimum, which, for those of you that are familiar with the controversy around the tax paid by multinational brands that operate in the UK and make a lot of income in the UK, is very specifically defined as EBITDA within India. So before any other accounting procedures are taken into account, a company here must give 2% of its EBITDA to a charitable cause or not-for-profit of one type or another.
Yeah. So that's the CSR clause of the Companies Act of 2013. And it mandates, as you see, that every company within that rule should invest in according to the policy of corporate social responsibility. The CSR rules are updated regularly, and we ensure that donors and NGOs are compliant. Most recently, there's been a requirement for impact assessment as a mandate, and we provide those services too. And I'm very proud to say that few of the donors we've done these for have actually given us very positive testimonials, because we go down to the last, we take a sample and go to the last person to whom the money has been given and check back on the reporting too.
Wow.
So it's not just that we collect data and pass it on, but we verify, cross-verify and validate it. And we have found that sometimes money, two things. Number one, money has not been used where it should have, whereas if you just check from the reports, you can't make that out. But number two, we're able to help smaller organizations to then reorganize their systems in order to be more transparent right down to the last rupee. So to donors too, we provide grant management services. Okay? Yeah. I think that's good for us, Derek. We are on the, yeah.
So I think we're down to the next slide.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So talk to us about impact and impact measurement, Nivedita, because it is true that it's a burgeoning field of endeavor. And I think everybody, no matter how much they give, wants to reassure themselves that they are achieving as much impact as possible.
That's wonderful. I think that the narrative around impact has now come into at least into the CSR domain. It was more about spending in a compliant manner, and it is indeed very timely given our Agenda 2030 and the setbacks due to the pandemic. CAF India itself works with close to 300 corporates and has a network of over 5,000 NGOs that we have already worked with, and many more who we would like to work with. We have a pan India geographical presence, and this network itself helps to accelerate delivery of developmental outcomes. The SDGs highlight leave no one behind, and gender is a cross cutting theme across all verticals. With this in view, the question is how do we reach the last person? Because that's the only way we can achieve our goals. I'm proud to say that we have adopted a gender lens to social change and to ensure that we reach the unreached. We are cause universal, which means that we support donors to give impactfully. However, if we look at our work over the years, it indicates key areas of expertise and themes of change, basis what we have already received. This includes, and I'll just give a short summary. Number one, early childhood development from 0 to 6 years, which is a great area of importance. Number two, livelihoods, both jobs and self-employment or micro enterprises, with skills development thrown in as a facilitator. Number three, education with a focus on science and technology, arts and math, teacher strengthening and infrastructure support. And now we're looking towards early career, higher education intervention.
So, if you don't mind, let me just stop you there for a second, because I think one of the things that I saw quickly in the poll, and I don't know how it's developed since, is that education was one of the areas people were really focused on in this audience. And I think what's important from what I've learned just in the last few days, spending time with you, Nivedita, is the different ways in which education is applied. So, would you like to talk about the journey of an Indian child from birth through to their first experience of school and how important that is?
Thank you so much, Derek, because that's an area which is a little bit under addressed, but though there are a lot of efforts around it. So we start from the first 1,000 days of the child from conception, and we take a life course approach to it. So if you look at the first 1,000 days, there is the Anganwadi system and the Poshan tracker that looks at the mother and mother and child health. But there are a lot of issues related to the nutritional issues related to childhood development. And as we go from once the child is born and is between year 1 and 3, there is a lot of work on developmental milestones related to cognitive development, where play and parental engagement and an environment which enables cognitive development is very crucial. That needs to be paid attention to. Imagine you're a construction worker. You're a woman who's left her village, come to a city where there are no provisions for school, for food, for any social protection, because most of those are based on where you come from. But you're in the construction building this huge high rise, and your children are just in the work site. So those children, then thousands of children like this.
So let me understand this. So if I understand it correctly, the vast majority of construction workers are not part of the formal economy. That's essentially 75% of what we would consider jobs and employment in India are actually informal.
Yes.
And so therefore, if you're a construction laborer, you typically have to literally bring your children to work with you.
Yes, and leave them at the site. And the children have no access to any sort of developmental ecosystem, leave alone water, food, etc. And the parents themselves, you can imagine how difficult their lives are. The latest 2019 Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey shows that the largest problem we have is of dietary diversity, leading to invisible kind of hunger, which is nutritional deficiency. So those kinds of issues, if the parents are so nutritionally deficient, you can imagine what kinds of issues we have. And then, of course, we have education, which is when you go to school, and yeah, and we have education when you go to school, and then we have issues related to teacher strengthening, infrastructure, because a lot of leadership in the classroom is provided by the teachers. The teachers themselves need a lot of investment and parental involvement. So these are areas we focus on very strongly. Health and environment are also areas of work that we look at. We have a strong footprint there. As we look at donors, we provide three or four very key services. Number one is grant management services. Number two is creating bespoke programs. Number three is tracking and assessing impact. And number four is legal and compliance advisories and support. We've talked a lot about it, but I wanted to talk a little about the due diligence and NGO validation services, which various organizations in the CAF network all provide. We provide advice on legal and statutory compliances. The validation team makes sure that we assess the NGO's credibility, ability to deliver, and to sustain programs on the ground. We also check legal, operational, and financial aspects. We look at anti-money laundering, world checks, various affiliations, and ensure adherence to the global compliance standard.
So essentially, you do everything you can to ensure the donation arrives in the right place and is used in the right way.
Thank you so much. We're also exploring setting up back-end services to strengthen these aspects in the sector. It's not just good enough to validate. We need to contribute to strengthening. So we support charities in ways that enhance and strengthen, number one, their credibility and visibility amongst donors. Number two, organizational practices for sustainable resource generation. Number three, project management. For example, we now have a tech platform for end-to-end grant management for ourselves as well as the NGOs we work with, and with human resources and technical capabilities, programmatically and otherwise. So these are the kinds of ways in which we can maximize.
And let me ask you this, as someone that's worked in the sector a long time. I mean, all this due diligence and regulatory compliance is absolutely essential. But how would you characterize, if you will, the ethics in the Indian NGO community, the motivations in the Indian NGO community?
I always say that every sector, every company is not the Tatas in India. You have a small shopkeeper, you have a large shopkeeper, you have a one-off company, and you have the Tatas who've been around for years and years. So the social sector is also similar. Like we say in Hindi, all five fingers are not the same, but there are exemplary organizations with a strong tradition of ethical values, of ethics, in terms of what kinds of ethics, apart from integrity and being focused on the communities that we exist to serve. We have values of frugality, values of authenticity, of transparency. The Indian social sector is very, very influenced by Gandhiji and by Gandhian values. And I don't mean to romanticize this. There's enough evidence and documentation to show these roots.
Thank you.
So the other thing is that very local and contextual development strategies are, in a sense, they're strategies, but are built on the value of whose agenda counts. So how do we build on local agenda? Because that's the only way change can happen. How does change happen? It happens when those who want to change participate in the process of change. So CAF India therefore grows the local ecosystem towards system change in terms of language, cultures, to catalyze the movement itself to goals. We work with governments. We have, for example, undertaken a study in the Sundarbans, which is a very fragile ecology in eastern India, which is greatly affected by climate change. It's prone to cyclonic disasters and tidal salinity, and these communities need to adapt their livelihood strategies and their lives. We've identified ways to do that with all the local NGOs that work there, and these livelihood strategies are being discussed now with potential donors to raise investments.
So I understand that you are talking about NGOs in the Indian context of essentially when you use the word NGO, a lot of people in the United Kingdom would use the word charity.
Yes.
First. But I wanted to just ask, like, what some of the advantages are of hyper localization in context. Can you give us a little bit more detail about the impact or the greater impact you create with the local gift or grant?
I would say that there are at least 4 advantages of being deeply embedded within the community and very local. Number one, you are part of that community, so you represent their interests.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, they trust you, so your credibility is very, very important in processes of change, particularly when we're changing behavior. Use new menstrual hygiene material, feed your children differently.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is the basic currency.
Mm-hmm.
The third is that such organizations have very low transaction costs.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go through layers and layers of very expensive, expensive layers.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth important thing is they're very agile because they're not large bureaucracies, so they can change very fast and be responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And the fifth is there are a lot of local innovations that can actually come to the fore.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of good programs in India were built like that. Something as simple as the business correspondent model, that a woman can be the banking agent without an ATM, a poor woman, has come from a small NGO's experience. My own work to build self-help groups has come from a 9 people strong organization. It's a countrywide program today. So those are the strengths of working with small organizations.
Fascinating. And I am just conscious of time. I want to make sure we have the right slide up. Should we have the next slide up? Or yes, I think it is the next slide we've moved on to. Thank you very much.
I'd like to come back to grant management and our offering of due diligence for NGO partners. So we've discussed this a little, but this entire offering is now of great value. And some of our partners did not have the regulatory were not compliant, and we helped them to do that. But we also conducted workshops for civil society organizations, to NGOs, to disseminate information. And in my view, it is an important work that CAF India should be pivoting towards, which is building institutional capacities of NGOs. And that is where substantial collaboration is needed from overseas, to be able to help NGOs to be stronger, to create the infrastructure, to make sure they reach the last person.
So one thing you would like people to take away is investing in infrastructure.
Yes.
Organizational capacity is a very valuable grant to be made.
Very, very valuable. It would go a long way, and we would have transparent ways of involving you with it and accountability. The other opportunity we're now harnessing is the hybrid model of implementation. In the last 25 years, CAF India has not participated as a direct implementing organization. However, since in the last 2 years, we have undergone a process of systematic change of our internal expertise in program design, management, and execution. So currently, we not only have skill sets to manage grants, but also to implement social impact projects across the country.
So I think there's a real enthusiasm. I think we understand a little bit better some of the ways that you support the sector and work with the sector here and what you deliver yourselves. I guess what I'm mindful of some of the site visits you have even arranged for me over the last few days. And I wonder if you can give us some examples from them or from others of how this really manifests itself in practice to the donor.
Thank you, Derek. I think it's widened our scope of collaboration with various stakeholders, because now we are not one donor to one NGO. And what we have is alliances with the government. So, for example, we've tied up with the state government of a labor supplying state in the eastern part of India. And we have embedded a technical support team within the Department of Labor.
So you're working with a government agency and you're amplifying their efforts.
We're amplifying their efforts and bringing in synergies with NGOs, which means that if the government has 850,000 candidates for jobs, the government incentivizes them to sign up, pays them unemployment allowance, which we've recommended. After which, we have NGOs which mobilize these people who have been looking for jobs from various places through career counseling to identify the right jobs. We bring in the employers, and then we handhold the young people, the candidates, for the first 6 to 8 months, so they stick with the jobs. So we have programs on that level. We work with the Women and Child Development department in one of the states, which is one of the hotbeds of malnutrition, endemic malnutrition in the globe. And we're working with 75,000 women's creches there, children's creches, to strengthen the frontline workers and parental engagement around developmental milestones we've talked about. And we bring in then the various NGOs who are in that state, working with the creches into the alliance, so that it is a large as well as a simple model where people can work together in alliances to bring about change. We're looking for investments so that corporates, foundations with similar agenda come in, and we can co-create an agenda for large-scale change.
That's really helpful. I think we're up for the next slide. So thank you so much for all of that, Nivedita. And I guess since we have moved on to questions, we can probably lose the slide deck altogether. We encourage other people to ask questions that haven't already. We already have some in. I'm not going to name check people unless they specifically say so. But I wanted to ask a question, which is that education is a very popular category of charity to give to. If you were to advise a donor who works on primary aged, which in the context of the UK, where the question comes from, are those under the age of 11, what would be the most important areas to focus on in terms of themes? And is there a geography that is particularly important as well?
I would say in terms of themes within education, there are three that we could prioritize. The first is there is a government school versus private school versus NGO-run school. There are three types of schools. So if we can work with schools which are NGO-run schools or government schools and strengthen those, that would go a long way. A second is looking at we work with the young children who are up to class 5 around learning outcomes. And there is the new national education policy. So we locate it within the national education policy, but bring in education strengthening, teacher strengthening, and bring in new ways in which teachers can teach, as well as, I would say, science, so that the issue of climate change and climate action can be understood. Build up libraries. We have a program where children are encouraged to read, because most of them are from families where their parents are illiterate. There's no libraries, there's no access to books. So building up the extracurricular to strengthen the curricula is very important. And language is a third, because we have three languages: your mother tongue, the national language, and English as a professional language. So that is very important at a young age. So we need to look at that. If we look at the high school students, it's learning outcomes, but also around arts or science, reading, writing, thinking skills, actual practicals that improve the learning outcomes for them. And of course, bringing girls into the classroom. I think I would suggest that the issue of girls dropping out of the schools is also related to menstrual health and hygiene. And I would suggest that would be a very green menstrual products in schools should be a very important area. If I have some time, I'd like to discuss that a little separately.
Great. Thank you. And we do have a few practical questions, which we'll get on to in a minute. But more broadly, one of our questions has come in. We do a lot of work on skills in young people and what's called NEETs in the United Kingdom. Not in education, employment, or training is what that stands for. I mean, what would be some areas that you would say that sort of NEETs clause applies to India?
I think that's really a very important area that we are going to we are working on, Jobs and Skills Alliance, and we also need to look at it in terms of job availability,
Mm-hmm.
because young Indians just don't have jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So what we are doing is, I'm proposing that we do very local studies of the jobs that are available, and then work backwards to match them to the populations and see who would fit into it, rather than take a skills up view. And there are many examples of this. And if we expand this across, I have no doubt that we'll be able to actually perhaps create more, not only match jobs, but create new jobs. Because employers, we had a meeting with employers today. Employers are looking for talent. There is the jobs gap. So I would suggest studying local jobs and jobs available within the country, and then linking back through information systems, through outreach with communities, and making sure candidates are trained.
And I'm going to just add to that, because I know you do early career interventions. Would you mind to explain what that is and what its larger purpose and impact is?
We're looking at early career researchers, or in the higher education sector, whether you're going in for a master's degree, a doctoral degree, or a postdoctoral degree. And especially for women from more from tier 3, 4 cities, as well as from the rural hinterland. Women who are educated, or women and who don't have the opportunity or even know about it. There's huge information asymmetry between the core, which is the urban space to which I belong to, and those who are outside of the core, the periphery. And we have a very strong need program to bring women from there into higher education, whether it's for science, technology, engineering, arts, for math, or for entrepreneurship and innovation.
From someone in the question, can a Mumbai-based non-FCRA registered grassroots NGO partner with CAF India?
Yes, it would be. We would like very much to do so, because for organizations which are not FCRA based, we need to look for domestic funds. So that is absolutely fine. We need an agenda. We need to co-create an agenda. We can go out together and look for funds, as long as we add value to each other beyond just money. But certainly, please do reach out.
We currently have an Indian registered foundation and rely on foreign donations, which we then subgrant. As we are no longer allowed to subgrant, do you suggest we close the foundation, or is it possible to direct the funds via CAF to within India?
I would suggest whether you close the foundation or not is a separate matter, but CAF could work with you. So we could look at we have various ways of doing this. So if you could get in touch with me after the webinar, then we can talk about it in detail and we find the best way to do it. But I have no doubt that there will be more than one way of doing this, and you would be able to choose what you would like.
A question which I think might be for me, but let me just read it properly. Does CAF validation provide an NGO with more opportunities to access funding? If so, in reality, is it the larger NGOs that have greater resources to cope with the due diligence requirements are in better position to actually do this? Well, the truth is that if you are in the United Kingdom, it makes absolutely no difference what size of organization you are or what your capacity is. Every single time that you receive funds, we must engage in a thorough due diligence process with you. So I wouldn't want to speculate on whether that advantages one type of charitable organization over another. But of course, the purpose to that process is to make as certain as we possibly can that your donation is arriving at the right place and being used in the right way. And we have done that many thousands of times to 135 different countries over the last year. I would also just ask this question. On one hand, the regulatory demands are so high, but on the other, the expenses on admin Oh, lost the thread there. Sorry, everyone. On one hand, the regulatory demands are so high, but on the other, the expenses on admin costs have shrunk. Most funders don't want to fund what they think are overheads. Non-project support is so essential for NGOs. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Would you like to talk about the need for non-essential overheads? It's absolutely something we believe in, investing in infrastructure.
And I think that we now need to look, one of the hopes for us is retail funding. COVID has opened up the possibilities to access retail funding. But givers need to be tapped. So we need to look at that. We have a small payroll giving program in CAP, which is now, it had grown, it shrunk a little because of technology changes and certain global changes. But there are ways we can access unrestricted funding. A third way is to just relook at how we account. I'm not talking about loopholes in the rules, but sometimes we are stuck in the old ways of accounting, and so we need to relook at how we are presenting our accounts. So we could look at that too. But this is a very important issue for all of us.
So look, absolutely fantastic. We do want to allow people a breather to get to their next appointment at the top of the hour if you're not in India, and at the bottom of the hour if you are. So I'm just going to ask a couple more questions that have come in, and then we'll do a quick summary. If we want to invest in an Indian registered impact fund, could we do that through CAF India and therefore avoid the need for PAN registration and us to file annual returns in India?
I would consider this as a hypothesis that we can discuss when we meet with, I think my CFO is on the call too, but I think we can take this offline. So do get in touch with us and let's discuss it in detail, and we'll figure out a way to meet whatever your goals are. I want you I just want to reiterate that we exist to make sure that you can give better, impactfully, in a compliant way. So please, with minimal risk to yourselves. So we will strive to do that.
I'm going to close on this question because I think in many ways the involvement of the Indian banking sector is actually very inspiring here. But what initiatives are in place to enable the Indian banking sector and the Indian NGO community to work more collaboratively, if any?
Well, the first one, the most important one here, is what I was involved with, the self-help groups. So in the year of the Lord 1987, when we developed this, what we found was that women could not. The first is when Indira Gandhi nationalized the banks. So there's priority sector lending. So Indian banks, unlike in, say, Bangladesh or our neighboring countries, Indian banks were focused on giving to the poor. And we call it priority sector lending. And we had a nationalization of the banking system. In 87, what we found is, and worldwide, there was a movement that women didn't have economic collateral, financial collateral. So groups became social collateral. And the banking system said the self-help groups actually began to borrow from banks and had 100% repayment rates of 99 to 100. And that is the way in which the women and the banking system got engaged. And over a period of time, the government has started the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. So, of course, the government of India has loans from the World Bank. But individual, and so that money flows through to the last woman through the group. But you're supposed to leverage money from the bank, credit from the bank. Unfortunately, the National Bank for Rural Development, the RBI, have facilitating sort of provision towards this. And we really need to be able to build this, because the Indian banking sector has many innovations that potentially link it with poor women particularly, and therefore families. But there's a lot of improvement required, and we need to make it happen.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Narain, thank you so much for joining us all online today. I am delighted that you have all been able to participate in this webinar. In answer to the question that was on the chat, yes, there will be a recording and it will be widely shared. If you have missed anything or would like to revisit anything that we have discussed, particularly the technical elements or the statistics or what have you, then one will be made available to you. Please contact your main CAF contact for that. I would also just encourage anyone who wants to give to India to please pick up the phone, send an email to your local CAF office in the United Kingdom at cafonline.org, in America at CAF America, and in Canada. We are here to help you give. We are here to do it in a way which protects your reputation, which minimizes the risk, and creates the most impact, and absolutely is regulatorily compliant. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any further questions, please contact your local CAF representative. And thank you very much for joining us this evening if you're in India, this afternoon if you're in the United Kingdom, and this morning if you're in the United States, or wherever else you may be. Thank you. And until the next time you join us, farewell.
Thank you. Is what I was involved with, the self-help groups. So in the year of the Lord 1987, when we developed this, what we found was that women could not. The first is when Indira Gandhi nationalized the banks. So there's priority sector lending. So Indian banks, unlike in, say, Bangladesh or our neighboring countries, Indian banks were focused on giving to the poor. And we call it priority sector lending. And we had a nationalization of the banking system. In 87, what we found is, and worldwide, there was a movement that women didn't have economic collateral, financial collateral. So groups became social collateral. And the banking system said the self-help groups actually began to borrow from banks and had 100% repayment rates of 99 to 100. And that is the way in which the women and the banking system got engaged. And over a period of time, the government has started the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. So, of course, the government of India has loans from the World Bank. But individual, and so that money flows through to the last woman through the group. But you're supposed to leverage money from the bank, credit from the bank. Unfortunately, the National Bank for Rural Development, the RBI, have facilitating sort of provision towards this. And we really need to be able to build this, because the Indian banking sector has many innovations that potentially link it with poor women particularly, and therefore families. But there's a lot of improvement required, and we need to make it happen.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Narain, thank you so much for joining us all online today. I am delighted that you have all been able to participate in this webinar. In answer to the question that was on the chat, yes, there will be a recording and it will be widely shared. If you have missed anything or would like to revisit anything that we have discussed, particularly the technical elements or the statistics or what have you, then one will be made available to you. Please contact your main CAF contact for that. I would also just encourage anyone who wants to give to India to please pick up the phone, send an email to your local CAF office in the United Kingdom at cafonline.org, in America at CAF America, and in Canada. We are here to help you give. We are here to do it in a way which protects your reputation, which minimizes the risk, and creates the most impact, and absolutely is regulatorily compliant. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any further questions, please contact your local CAF representative. And thank you very much for joining us this evening if you're in India, this afternoon if you're in the United Kingdom, and this morning if you're in the United States, or wherever else you may be. Thank you. And until the next time you join us, farewell.
Thank you.